My name is Anthony Ortiz. I am an executive member of Third World Alliance, a student organization here on campus. It is an honor here today as we kick off our celebration of Latino Heritage Month with our lecture from Dr. Nunez, as well as other activities that we have in the upcoming schedule, which such as Latin dance lessons, which are held every Tuesdays from 7 to 9 p.m. here in the exhibit area, starting next week. Before we begin, I would like to ask the Latino Heritage Committee members and Third World Alliance to please stand as we give them a round of applause for all the planning that went into today's lecture. And as a reminder, I'd like to mention if we please stay tuned for announcements after the question and answers period for an opportunity to interact with Dr. Nunez in the PDR room located upstairs in this building. I would like to start off by introducing our new addition to the Worcester State family, Dr. Charles Cullum. Dr. Cullum has been a provost and vice president for academic affairs here at Worcester State University since July 1st, 2010. He has 14 years of experience and has worked at 4 universities in 3 states. He served as an associate provost and dean of graduate studies at Kutztown University of Pennsylvania and received a PhD from Temple University. So will you guys please join me in welcoming the new members of our family, Dr. Cullum.
Thank you very much, Anthony. We're very happy to welcome Dr. Elsa Nu to our campus on this typically beautiful, fall, crisp Massachusetts day. Dr. Nunez is in her 5th year as president of Eastern Connecticut State University. Among her other senior administrative posts, she has served as vice president of academic and student affairs for the University of Maine system, as vice president for academic affairs of Lesley University, and as vice chancellor for student affairs of the City University of New York. I'd like to also highlight, speaking as a former English professor, that she began her academic career in the English department at Ramapo State University in New Jersey. Under Dr. Nunez's leadership, Eastern Connecticut State University has received a number of major national recognitions, including being named one of the top 100 regional universities in the North by U.S. News and World Report, being recognized for the 2nd year in a row by the Chronicle of Higher Education as a great college to work for, and 2 honors that we here at Worcester State University are proud to share, being named to President Obama's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll, also for the 2nd year in a row, and being included in the Princeton Review's list of best colleges in the Northeast. Dr. Nunez received a Bachelor's of Art from Montclair State College, an MA from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a doctorate in linguistics from Rutgers University. Dr. Nunez serves on the American Council of Education's Commission on Women in Higher Education, on the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, for which she has also served as chair of the Commission on Institutions of Higher Education, and on the boards of such organizations as the Girl Scouts of Connecticut and the Mark Twain House and Museum. And so now, speaking on the achievement gap, no excuses, please welcome President Elsa Nu.
Hi everybody, thank you Dr. McCollum for that very nice introduction. I always get scared if the introduction is too long because, as you know, how many math majors we have here? There's a correlation between the length of the introduction and age, so I don't want to seem to be too long. Thank you for being here. First of all, let me thank President Ashley for extending me this invitation and hosting such a wonderful luncheon we just came for. And I understand she's been a terrific president, hasn't she? Dean Marcella Ruby Jennings from the Office of Multicultural Affairs, Lasmi Rizundial, both who greeted me and have worked with me in getting me here. I want to thank you both of you for making me feel so welcome here this afternoon. Thank you. I want to acknowledge your chairman of the board, John Brissett, for providing leadership for this great institution. You've accomplished a great deal, and leadership starts at the top, and I know the board is very involved, so I want to congratulate the board and Mr. Brissett for all they've done for Worcester. Well, I went on your website, like most of you do, to Google and to see, and I saw that for the past 7 years, you've been in Princeton Review for the best college in the Northeast. Isn't that tremendous? That's great. So Worcester's a great place. It's a wonderful place, and you should be very proud. And now you're no longer Worcester State College. You're what? Worcester State University. So that's a big deal. It's wonderful. You can put all of that in your presentation. Before I start with my formal comments, because I do have a lot of data that I want to go over, and the topic that I'm talking about this afternoon is the achievement gap. That is, why is it that there's such a disparity between how much math, reading, and writing white children know from what Hispanic, mostly I'm going to be talking about because it's Hispanic Heritage Month, but also black children. So the question is why, how much, and what can we do about it? But before I get into those details, I want to tell you a story, and I want to talk to the students, if the professionals in the room would allow me that privilege just for a moment. Many years ago, I'm 62 years old, I got a letter of admission to a state college in New Jersey. And I was thrilled. I was the oldest of many children, a huge Puerto Rican family, very poor, born to a mother and father who were factory workers from very modest backgrounds. We lived in projects, and we didn't have much. I always tell people in the Puerto Rican family we used to eat rice soup on Fridays because we didn't have money for meat. But it was a wonderful, loving family, and I had brothers and no sisters. I was the only girl. The day that I got the letter said that I was to get to an orientation program at the campus and that it was required. So that I told to my mother and father, and my mother, interestingly enough, had a very positive reaction. She really wanted us to go to college because my father had always said, the only way you can get out of this damn hole of poverty in the projects is by going to school, going to college. He was very clear about that. We had no books in the house, but he read the newspaper every day because that's all he could afford. And so my mother took me to a store that was called, in those days, S. Klein on the Square. You're too young to know, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was like a Walmart, a very cheap, store where you could buy inexpensive things. In this store, things were not nicely displayed on racks. For example, shoes were in a big container in the middle of the floor, thrown with a little tie between the two shoes, the left and the right one, and you went through the pile to see what discount shoe you could buy. The clothes were discounted. And so my mother went with me, and she went shopping. So my mother picked out for me a blue suit. I'll never forget the color blue, like your t-shirt. And she picked this suit. I mean, it's just emblazoned in my memory. Was two-piece, and it had a little cheap scarf that ran around the neck. And I was never, I'm short to begin with, and I was never heavy, so the suit was a little too big for me, but it was the suit that was on sale that she wanted to buy me. Then we went through the pile of shoes, and my mother rather, picked out a pair of shoes, and they were plastic. We couldn't afford leather, so I got a pair of these shiny plastic shoes. And then she, of course, wanted me to have a pocketbook. So we went through a pile where the pocketbooks were, and she picked out a pocketbook, and we went home. The day of orientation, I put the outfit on, the blue suit, the shiny shoes, and the little pocketbook that was probably more appropriate for evening, and I went to orientation. I took a bus. As I got off the bus, I noticed people going in a direction I asked. I was a good student in high school, but I was shy. I got off the bus, I went into the orientation. In the orientation, at the desk, the table, a young man said to me, take your name tag. I put it on. He said, and the person who's your big brother will come and escort you and show you around. So I went in, and the first thing I noticed, I'm talking to the students because all of you have had this experience, was that I wasn't dressed like anybody else. All the girls had sweaters and pleated skirts. I'm 62, that's what they were wearing in those days, short with knee socks. All their shoes were loafers, penny loafers with little pennies. They all had white blouses with sweaters, and they had a gold pendant right here with their 3 initials. I instantly said, God, Mother Earth, open up and take me out of here. I don't want to be here. I don't belong here. My big brother came walking over to me, a handsome white guy, very handsome. He looked at me the way I was dressed. He said, are you Elsa? I said, yes. He said a sentence or two, walked away. I never saw him again. That day, I got back on the bus and I went home and I cried and I said, I will never go to college. I don't belong there. There's a gap. It may not be an achievement gap, but there's a social gap. I don't belong there. And I went home, stormed into the kitchen. My family was all getting ready to eat. My father said, Elsa, and Sita, he used to call me, which means little Elsa, and Sita, affectionately, did you have a great day? Well, tell us about it. And I looked at him ready to burst into tears and to tell him that I hated it and that I hated what I had on and that I looked stupid and that I was ashamed and embarrassed to be Puerto Rican. And at that moment, I looked at my mother and my father said, tell us, didn't they say you look beautiful? I said, beautiful. He said, and Elsa, your mother didn't buy groceries for 2 weeks so that she could buy you your outfit. I swallowed hard and I said, Daddy, Papi, we don't say Daddy, we say Papi, I was the most beautiful girl in the room. And I went upstairs, I cried, washed my face, came down, had dinner, and I said, I will graduate from college. Because that is fundamentally what it's about. It is getting over the gap, getting over the difference, getting over it, period, and achieving the goal that you set for yourself. Whether your family sets it for you, as in my case, or whether you set it for yourself, it will never be perfect. You will never fit in. You will never be the smartest person in the room. You will never get straight A's. But whatever life deals you, to the students, you get on the bus and you go back. The title of my presentation today is The Achievement Gap. No excuses. And I mean it. I shouldn't have had any excuses that day. My family provided for me more than what they had. Seeing the educators today in the audience, the professional people, I realize that many of you know much more than I do about the education gap. But during my remarks today, I'm going to try to provide some context for the students and for all of you, my colleagues, so that we can increase the level of achievement among Latinos, all students, but I've been asked because of Hispanic Heritage Month to talk about Latinos, so that we can make this a stronger society as individuals. Elsa Maria Núñez, what a beautiful name. Elsa Maria Núñez, what a beautiful name. Oh, Elsa Maria Núñez, that is such a beautiful name. And so began each of my English freshman classes. Professor McGee, who was a World War II veteran and a paraplegic in a wheelchair, read the roster each day. Elsa Maria Núñez had a very different sound from Bernard Chabadi and Teddy Nolan. My name sounded melodic, and it stood out. I fell in love with my name as he read it each day. I was an English major. He, of course, was trying to make me feel comfortable and fit in. I didn't realize it at that time. The second week of classes, I got a paper back one day from him with a great number of red marks. The paper was covered with red marks. I looked at it and I was devastated. I was a good student in an urban high school in the ghetto. The note in the top of the paper said, "See me in my office." I took the paper, folded it. I didn't talk to anybody because I didn't know the students. And at the beginning of the semester, I felt that I didn't fit in. Everybody knew so much more than I did. They could answer questions about the literature. They had these analytical minds that mine I didn't think I had, and I felt very, very much inadequate. I went to his office, and for the entire semester, 3 times a week, I sat next to him while I rewrote my papers, and he read or wrote a paper himself. Every once in a while, he would look up, he would grab my paper, and he'd say, "Elsa, you need to do this, this, or that." And then he'd comment on my progress. I ended up being one of the best writers in the class, and I went on to be an English major. I graduated from that college, Worcester State University, because Dr. McGee saw my achievement gap. But you know what? Instead of making me feel inadequate and small and bad, he was determined to close it. Discussions of the achievement gap should not be abstract discussions, my friends, but discussions which focus on what we know about ourselves. That's where the achievement gap begins. Everyone in this room has an achievement gap. Maybe it's science, maybe it's math, or maybe it's art history. We fill or close those gaps through different ways, either informal education or formal education, and most of us spend our lifetime closing those achievement gaps. So let's focus for this afternoon, for the next 15 minutes, on the achievement gap, but instead of saying those people don't know math, or don't know how to write, or don't know science, let's talk about they don't have those skills, but in the context of I don't have all the skills I should have either. It makes a big difference in your perspective. The first point I want to make is that the achievement gap in our country is not only about Latinos. African Americans, especially black males, are very much at risk. Low-income students and urban students, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of race, are at risk. Many of the solutions we must pursue in presenting Latino children with educational opportunity should not and cannot be targeted closely or solely at them, but must be implemented for all students, because I'm a big proponent of these differences that divide us. They're class issues. They're not race and ethnic issues. A poor person that's white deserves the help that a poor person that is black or Hispanic deserves. Secondly, while I will speak briefly later in my presentation about access and opportunity in college, I do have to focus on K through 12 because that's where the main problem is for us as a community. Simply put, we need to graduate more Latinos and other students of color from high school if we want to see them at Worcester State University. In fact, as you will note from the research I will share with you, the first day of college really begins in preschool, the day the child enters nursery school. If we give Latinos and other students of color services and support they need as very young children, we greatly increase their chances of graduating from high school and going to college. I'm going to share statistics with you because this is an academic session, but I want to start off by sharing with you what I think is the telling piece of information that I could find in the National Center for Educational Statistics data. They show that there are absolutely no statistical differences among ethnic groups for mental scale scores at the age of 9 months. That means you put a Hispanic baby, a white baby, and a black baby. Let me say it again more simply. You put those 3 babies together in this country, you can see that these 3 babies will demonstrate the same mental capacity, regardless of their race or ethnicity, as I said. In fact, even when the educational level of the mother, whether or not the mother has a parenting partner, or income levels are considered, there is no significant difference in mental acuity at the age of 9 months. The only factor that seems to make a difference at that age is the weight of the baby at birth. Babies who weigh less than they should at birth don't perform as well mentally at 9 months. But when you control for weight, there's no statistical difference. This data tells me 2 things. First, Thomas Jefferson was right. We are indeed created equal. Secondly, nutrition plays a fundamental role in our development. Nutrition and health care are huge factors influencing educational attainment. Latinos have the lowest level in this country of health care insurance coverage of any ethnic group in the United States. So right off the bat, Latinos are at a huge disadvantage. Social policy is as important as educational policy. So you, the students who are getting your degree from Worcester, cannot say it's all about educational policy. You've got to get into the debate about social policy, healthcare among it. What that means is that the solution to the educational achievement gap cannot solely be one of educational reform. All the other factors involved, nutrition, teenage pregnancy, housing, crime, cultural disconnect, inner city economics, and a host of others must be seen as a systemic condition that must be treated as a whole. In terms of Latinos, we know there are family dynamics, language barriers, and other cultural issues that we need to address as a community. As educators, you and I certainly have a huge impact on many of these issues, but the educational achievement gap must be everybody's business in this room, and it will take all of us to achieve it and close it. So let us begin. I think the first thing we need to do is have a clear idea of the scope and the extent of the problem. I do not want to drown you with numbers, that's not the purpose of my talk, but national statistics as well as data here from Massachusetts and other states are helpful in defining the problem we face. Let's look at the national data first. On all types of measures, grades, dropout rates, test scores, college-going rates, and college completion rates, Latinos continue to lag behind whites and most African Americans. Those gaps begin to show up as early as the age of 5 and 6. That's the first time you see the gap, and it's directly tied to socioeconomic status. 41% of adults aged 20 and older in the United States who are Hispanic do not have a regular high school diploma. It's 23% for blacks, 14% for whites, but almost 45% for Hispanics. The Latino dropout rate is 17%. For blacks, 9%. For whites, 6%. Latinos constitute 16% of the population today. We're growing. Yet, we only represent 6% of college graduates. While the overall poverty rate in this country for everybody is 12%, it's 21% for Hispanics. And it's a little slightly higher, 23% for blacks. 90% of Latino young adults say that a college education is important, and yet 40% of those same kids say they will never go to college. That's according to the Pew Hispanic Center. When we look at ethnic breakdowns from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the picture is equally bleak. 2009 National Assessment scores for math and reading in grades 4 and 8 show that 50% of blacks and 45% of Latinos fall below the basic level of achievement in this country compared to 17% of whites. The gap exists in every state and is pronounced in urban school districts. You have a card that was given out? Okay, why don't you look at that with me in a minute. I'll get to that. Hispanics trail in math all of whites in this country by 26 points in 8th grade. In 8th grade in reading, we trail 24 points. In science, we trail by 32 points. And in writing in 8th grade, we trail by 21 points. That's a lot of points, my friends. You're talking about really significant gaps. Blacks trail whites in math by 32 points in 8th grade. They trail whites by 26 points in reading, by 37 points in science, and 22 points in writing. Let me show you what's happening in Massachusetts, because it's important. That's the national data. Hispanics in the state of Massachusetts, the children, when you take all white children, Hispanic children, and black children in 8th grade, in math we trail white children by 34 points. That's incredible. That means you can't function in mathematics in this country, in the state of Massachusetts. We trail whites in reading in 8th grade by 28 points. We trail whites in science by 28 points, and we trail whites in writing by 35 points. Blacks in Massachusetts trail whites in mathematics by 33 points, in reading 27 points, in science 35 points, and in writing 26 points. My God, when you look at the data, you say, it's no wonder they drop out. It's no wonder they can't get to college. Those gaps mean you can't function at your grade level. For business people in the audience, a McKinsey & Company report indicates that if we close the national achievement gap with nations such as Finland and Korea, which have hardly any gap, we could raise our gross domestic product, our GDP, your business majors in the room, by almost 16%. That is $1 to $3 trillion. We would increase our revenue in this country. Closing the ethnic minority gap in this country, just the ethnic minority gap, we could increase our gross domestic product by 4%. That's astounding. It appears that urban students are especially at risk. Let's drill down a bit on these two factors. The National Assessment's Trial Urban District Project looked at more than a dozen large school districts in the nation. When compared against each other for both grades 4 and 8, because most of the data is taken at 4th grade and at 8th grade. Those are the two telling points. 5 districts emerged showing progress: Boston, Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Louisville, and Miami. Urban districts falling beneath the average were Baltimore, Cleveland, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Fresno, Los Angeles, and Milwaukee. They were the poorest performing districts. The cities where Latinos are showing the most gains include Boston, Austin, Miami, Charlotte, and for grade 4, Boston, Austin, Houston, and Miami for grade 8. Perhaps the simplest analysis of the data is that few cities are achieving and sustaining gains, but some of our older, more blue-collar, heavy industrial cities are really struggling with their schools. Look at the card that I gave you. Let's look at Texas. I don't want to read all of this because you have it in front of you. Look at grades 4th and 8th. In Texas, in 1992, they scored 218. This is the average score, the mean score rather, for all children in Texas. In 2009, they jumped to 240 compared to the national mean, which is 239. So Texas is improving. Something's going on there. Grade 8, they were at 258 in 1990. They jumped to 287. They beat the national average. Something's going on in Texas. Go to reading. Reading in Texas, 213 in 1992, 219 in 2009, the national average 220 on the reading test. In grade 8 in Texas, 262, jumped to 260. They're a little below the national average in reading, but not significantly. Let's look at Florida. Good things are happening in Florida. They started out in 1992 in grade 4, 214. They jumped to 242 by 2009, higher than the national average, which is 239. 1992, they jumped from 260 in 92 to 279 in 2009, again beating the national average. Reading, they did very well, starting at 208 points in 1992. They jumped to 226, which is higher than the national average. And the same thing in grade 8, from 253 to 264, just slightly beating the national average. California has done a lot. The Hispanic population is huge in California. They started in 1992 with 208 and jumped to 232 in 2009 and beating the national average. The same thing in grade 8, 261 to 270, not beating the national average, but they're on to something there. In California, look at the reading scores. Very important because Hispanics have a tough time with language when they're first coming into the school system. So in grade 4, they were at 202, jumped to 210, slightly lower than the state average, but still they're showing progress. 250 in grade 8, 253 in 2009. They haven't made as much progress, but you can see that in California, reading is really the language skill that is giving them the hardest time. 3 observations we can make from the data, my friends. Clearly, Latinos continue to struggle academically in our country. I am especially concerned about the longitudinal data. The national assessment data shows that the achievement gap between Latinos and whites widens as the children get older. Data from 2004 show that the reading gap at age 9 is 21 points. At age 13, it's 24 points, and at age 17, it jumps to 39 points, almost 40 points difference in reading. For math, it's the same, 18, 23, and 24. We are failing these children. Instead of building on success in school, as they stay in school longer, their scores get worse and the gap widens. Why? Why? If you're in school, does the gap widen? That's what I would be asking if I was in your seat today. Secondly, urban districts continue to struggle to make progress. The top 10 largest school districts in the country account for 8% of all students in grades K through 12. None have graduation rates as high as 50%. None have a score of a graduation rate of 50%. In New York City, the graduation rate remains under 50%. It's hovering around 44%, as it does in many U.S. cities. How could that be that you get 100 freshmen in high school and only 50 or 45 graduate? What happened to the other 45 or 50 students? Finally, looking here in Massachusetts, while the overall test scores in Massachusetts are higher than the national average, you're doing well. You're doing very well in Massachusetts. The gap between the performance of white and Latinos is larger in Massachusetts than in the national figures. So Massachusetts in the Hispanic attainment gap is doing worse. Writing proficiency seems to be the area where children in Massachusetts cannot outperform their white counterparts. So we have gaps based on ethnicity, based on income, and based on location. That's the point of the talk. Ethnicity, income, right, and location. That is not to say that all Latinos are poor. My children aren't. And that all African Americans live in our cities. We know African Americans live in rural areas as well. Or that both groups are inherently going to achieve academically lower rates than their white counterparts. That's absolutely not true. Other factors being equal. But clearly the achievement gap has disproportionately impacted students of color, inner city students, students from poor incomes or modest backgrounds. This is where our focus should be. Who should be concerned about this gap? The educational achievement gap. Surely the Latino community should be, and we are. I talk about it everywhere I can. The demographics of our nation are swiftly changing. In 2000, 68% of our population was white, 13% black, and 13% Hispanic, and about 4% Asian. Can you guess, my friends, what it will be in 2050? In 2050, the white population will go down. It'll be 49%. The black will stay constant population. That'll be 14%. The Asians will move up to 8%, and Hispanics will move up to 25% of the nation's population. Unless we change the high school and college completion rates among Latinos, we are in danger of having a nation with a permanent divide of those who can make a contribution to our economy and those who cannot because they don't have the skills or the education. The changes we must take to heart and to make right away to turn the situation around are not made easily. They're not funded or sustained over time yet. And it will take a long-term, sustained effort across every state in order to realize the social economic equality needed to ensure a viable national economy and stable social order in the next 40 years. It's time to close the achievement gap and make it a national priority. Our candidates cannot ignore that anymore. So, what can you do as college-educated students? You can talk about it. You can read about it. You can read the data that I gave you, find the data, and talk about it. I don't want to live in a nation where there's such disparity, might be something you would say. Let's look at some strategies for changing what goes on in and outside of the classroom. First, we must address the social and educational issues concurrently. I said that earlier. Pedro Noguera, Google him. He's a professor at NYU, he's a sociologist, he's one of the best writers on the subject, has written extensively and eloquently on this subject. You should invite him to speak to you. I think he said it best when he noted, over the past 40 years, studies have shown that educational policy must be devised in concert with health reform, poverty alleviation initiatives, and economic development in order to address the roots of failure in the most depressed areas in this country. From crime and unemployment to teen pregnancy, even racism and education, or the lack thereof, is implicated in many of our nation's social and economic problems. They all must be coordinated, and all aspects of public policy must be addressed. Some of the issues that Dr. Noguera refers to have particular impact for the Latino community. It's Hispanic Heritage Month, and you want to focus on this population. And I already told you of the impact of low birth weight on intellectual growth. Nutrition, education, and related programs must be part of the solution for the Hispanic community. As far as health care goes, Latinos have the lowest health care insurance coverage rate in America. 68% of all Latinos have no health care coverage. Teenage pregnancy is also an issue we must address. Our young people in the Hispanic community have babies at a very early age and are unable, in many cases, to continue their education because of child care. Unemployment among Latino youth is 40 to 50%. The kids are on the street, they're doing drugs, they're doing everything that they shouldn't be. All of the issues must be addressed, or the educational reform we cannot address. Latinos also face the issue of language. I couldn't speak English when I came to this country, but we cannot expect this issue to be solved solely by the schools. If you want children, little children, to know English, you have to teach their parents English. And in order to teach their parents English, you have to have programs available not only for the children, but the parents who want to learn English. When upwards of 40% of Latino homes in the communities speak no English at home, that's 40%, it's almost half of all the children's homes. There's no English ever spoken. You need adult English literacy programs, and you need to help the community learn English. Most Hispanics want to learn English. The myth that we don't want to learn English is nothing but a myth. We want to learn English. In Willimantic, Connecticut, where the university, Eastern Connecticut State University is, the United Way sponsors a parent-family literacy program. They go hand in hand with what's going on in the school. We say we need Latino parents to become involved with children's schoolwork, teach them to read and write English, and the parents will become involved. Third, preschool and school English literacy education is critical. If I could convince lawmakers and politicians to do one thing, I'd convince them to invest in early childhood education, that every child in this country started preschool at the age of 3. If we did that, could you imagine these children would flourish from preschool to kindergarten? All the children in low-income families who enroll in preschool are 30% more likely to graduate from high school and twice as likely to go to college. Could you imagine? Preschool is a predictor of high school graduation and college completion. That is amazing, amazing to know. Yet, people don't want to invest in preschool. It's not glitzy. It's not for politicians. I remember in Maine once I asked a politician why he wouldn't put that as part of his platform. He said, "Oh, Elsa, that'll take too long for it to realize any success, and I'll get no credit for it." For Latino children, preschool English literacy instruction has been seen as a given, not as a value added. At my university, we're fortunate to have a wonderful faculty that got a $4 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education, and they're teaching reading methodology to the teachers and the aides in the schools. We believe that the Latino gap right now, achievement gap in reading, which is 70% in this town, 70%, that means that whites know 70% more than the Hispanic students. They score higher in reading, that we can close that achievement gap. We also have what's called the mathematics brigades. The Eastern students go into 8th grade, and they're determined to close the achievement gap. We have a campaign at Eastern to close the reading gap and the mathematics gap in the hometown where we are. The students go in, all the math majors, computer science majors, business majors, and they tutor in mathematics in the classroom and also in after-school programs. We believe that the math gap in 5 years we can close in Willimantic. There are just some of the societal and community-based steps we need to take to impact the achievement gap. Dr. Noguera has noted educational reform alone cannot fix our problems, nor will it result in improved academic achievement among Latinos and other minority groups without systemic social change. However, there are strategies, as the few that I have mentioned this afternoon, that we can implement inside the schools, and you as college students can be part of the movement. And as luck would have it, some of the best work in our high schools today is being done right here in Massachusetts. You've got some very good high schools that you can volunteer in, or middle schools, 8th grades, and you can help close the gap. In reviewing the types of interventions that have been successful in 15 schools in Massachusetts, the Achievement Gap Initiative, which is a big constituency here in this country, said that all the work that you and I do to close the achievement gap must be thoughtful and relentless. Isn't that a terrific word? Thoughtful and relentless. What they mean by that is that you cannot create change and close the gap by doing it a little bit here and a little bit there. Payne concludes, who wrote about the achievement gap, that high schools are the most difficult level of educational spectrum to implement change, and we can see that here in Massachusetts as well as other states. First of all, local leadership has to be accepting of the responsibility for change. That's the superintendent and the schools, and also the principals and the teachers. What happened at Taft High School in Cincinnati was one of Ohio's lowest performing schools, and it had to find a way to change this culture where 90% of the student body was African American. 10 years ago, a new principal took over. This is Taft High School in Cincinnati, and today it has a 90% graduation rate. There was nothing wrong with the students, there was something wrong with the school. The second thing is you have to focus on a few good ideas. So when you get together in your clubs and organizations with your faculty, with the administrators, don't do 100 things in the schools here in Worcester. Pick 1 or 2 things to emphasize and go in and do them relentlessly. Good teachers make all the difference in the world. The data on this is stunning. Data from Boston, Tennessee, and Texas has shown that students who are taught by the best teachers do 6 times better on tests than students taught by the lowest third of the teachers. And it's not just about hiring and training certified instructors or teachers, it's about professional development for them over time. There are many schools in this country that can brag about high performance teachers. In Massachusetts, Randolph High School uses instructional coaches to help the teachers, and it's working. The fourth, as I said earlier, you have to have clear, measurable goals and results. That is, you cannot talk the game and then say we're doing terrific work in the school. You've got to be able to chart your progress, measure it so that you can tell people that you are successful in closing the gap. In many high schools, they believe that the data that they're collecting on students over time will show their success. Certainly, the degree to which students are engaged in and committed to their learning is going to positively affect their academic progress, and the data is compelling. And then, finally, fifth, you can plan, but you must be relentless with your charge. There's that word again, relentless. It makes me think of the Apollo mission, D-Day, stamping out polio. I'm not being dramatic here. I'm attacking the achievement gap. It means attacking what appears to be impossible, the impossible divide, facing it head on. Building what amounts to an army of students like yourselves and showing up to work every day in those schools to tutor and work with the children so that you can close the gap here in your community. They found in the Achievement Gap Initiative that if you are relentless and you tutor and you guide the students all the time for an academic year, you will see by the end of the year test results that will show improvement in closing the gap. Finally, there are a lot of things that you and I can do to close the achievement gap from a college or a university, but it's wonderful to have a faculty who's dedicated, as yours is and mine is at Eastern. We have a diverse faculty at Eastern. We have about 30% minority faculty. We have the highest percentage in all of COPLAC. Eastern is Connecticut's only public liberal arts university, and the Council of Public Liberal Arts Universities publishes their percentages. We're pretty high. That minority faculty at Eastern is very much involved in closing the achievement gap in the town where Eastern exists. So it's the students and the faculty. But we have other faculty too who are not minority doing the same thing. There's a real love of the community and a real spirit that America is great and we can close the achievement gap. So many of our Latino and Black students are in community colleges, and what you will find is that we never make it out of a community college. 80% of all Hispanics that begin their college education in a community college never ever graduate with a bachelor's degree. It's too long. The road is too long. By the time you finish your associate degree, 3 or 4 years have gone by. You don't have the stomach to go another 3 or 4 years to Worcester State University. You just don't. So something has to be done between the connection of Worcester to the community colleges to get those students as soon as you can into Worcester State University and not spend as much time in the community colleges if they don't need it. If they need it, they should. In conclusion, I know you deeply care about this topic or you wouldn't have sat with me to listen for the last 20 minutes. But I know this has been a lot to absorb, as discussions about educational policy often are. Let me leave you with a story much easier to listen to. It's the story of Latinos in New England, and it is much the same regardless of whether you're talking about Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, or New Hampshire. Latinos came to this country from many, many countries. We're not a homogeneous group. We're actually very diverse. Even those from Puerto Rico, born as citizens to the United States, still face the same conditions as immigrants from Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. They worked in factories, in the poultry factories in Connecticut. They worked in manufacturing factories all over Massachusetts. They picked mushrooms and apples. They planted tomatoes because they were, of course, the people who worked the fields. In Connecticut and Massachusetts, along the Connecticut River Valley, they worked in the Tobacco Valley. There were 200 tobacco farms, 3,000 square miles from Hartford to Springfield, where Latinos worked and sweated. They slept on the floor in barns with animals because they wouldn't give them beds. They were only immigrants, and they were only itinerant workers. The camps were patrolled by guards with barbed wire around the camps. They wouldn't allow the Latinos to leave, but they were afraid they wouldn't come back. They gave them modest amounts of food, just enough nourishment to get them back into the fields. They worked in Boston, they worked in New Bedford, and they worked here in Worcester. To manage the culture shock and the economic hardships, the women were sometimes raped by the men who worked there, and sometimes their bosses. They brought their entire families to the farms and to the lands, the foreign lands of the United States. The music was unfamiliar, the food tasted differently. Latinos were coming and were confronted by language barriers of sinister implications. As one Latino person said to me in Willimantic when I interviewed her for a paper, another paper I did on Connecticut Hispanics, if you couldn't speak Spanish, English rather, they would put you in special education. It was so humiliating. Some of us have been fortunate, and I have overcome these obstacles, and some of you in this room have overcome obstacles. I was born in a western town of Puerto Rico in the mountains. My father and mother moved to this country, and they're the best Americans you'll ever find. My father today says there's no greater country than the United States of America because they gave our family an opportunity. I was able to get a college education, and as my father often said, education was truly the path out of the projects. Some of you believe that the achievement gap must be closed for economic development reasons, and that's okay. Some of you believe that the achievement gap must be closed for social justice issues because you are fair-minded Americans, and that's okay. Some of you believe that the achievement gap should be closed because of public policy issues. It makes sense for the country, and that's okay. But my friends, there is no system of higher education in the world that is better than this one. Within your lifetime, within my lifetime, I changed my social class from very poor to upper middle class. You can't do that in Turkey, where only 1% of the population gets admitted into college. Here in America, your mother can clean toilets and you can go to Harvard. Your father can work in a factory and you can come to Worcester State University and get a first-class education. We have a meritocracy in this country, and that is that your seat can be earned if you work hard, not because you have a fancy last name or because your skin is a certain color. It is a great meritocracy, and it is what makes this nation great. The reason that closing the achievement gap is so important to our country is that we must protect this great democracy by educating everyone. We educate people to critique government, we educate people to critique business, we educate people to overhaul public policy. By educating everyone, just as you and I are educated, you and I protect a democracy. We allow it to flourish, we protect its roots, which allows this country to be strong, vibrant, and truly democratic. Thank you.